Hey guys, welcome to Terrifying Tales. In this video we are going to represent you a story about You Are What You Eat. I sat on the railroad as the rain came pouring down on me. I slid myself down and hoped it would just go away. I wish I had a home to go to. Well, I do. But I ran away from there and I never want to go back. I'd much rather be here alone on the streets than to go home with my abusive brothers. My parents died in a car crash about a year ago, leaving me alone with my two older brothers. I was the youngest boy in the house. I'm 17 and my brothers are well into their 20s. They don't even care about me. If they did, they wouldn't be beating me up all the time and saying horrible shit to me. I'm better off without them. I was blinded by bright car lights flashing right on me. I squinted my eyes and tried to block the lights from my eyes. It looked like the car was just turning the corner I'm at, but it came to a stop. I heard a car door and heels clinking on the street. I saw the silhouette of a woman in front of the car lights, and then she eagerly walked over to me. It was still dark and hard to see her, but she walked right up to me, crossing her arms and shivering as she didn't have a coat on. "Are you okay? What are you doing out here all alone without a coat?" she asked, almost in a shout voice. All you could hear was the rain pouring on the cement, trees swaying in the rough wind, and the sound of cars and traffic in the distance. "I'm fine," I replied, only I wasn't. I was freezing and definitely did not want to go home. It was too far anyway. "Where's your house? Do you need a ride home?" she asked. "I don't have a home," I replied, and I meant it. My house is not my home anymore. I will never return. I'm done. It was silent for about a minute. All you heard was the rain and cars passing by, splashing water on us both. The woman shivered and my clothes were completely soaked through. There was no way I could feel warm right now. "Why don't I take you to my place, at least for a while? I just feel bad for you out here by yourself, and you can eat dinner with us," she said, and I think she smiled too. Us, I assumed maybe it was her boyfriend or husband or whatever. I didn't think too much of it. I sighed, getting up and walking over to the passenger side of the car while the girl took the driver's seat. The car light lit up inside, and I could see her clearly. She had bleached blonde hair and a warm smile. The car was pretty warm too, and it smelled like vanilla and sugar. The radio was on, playing some Adele song that I think I've heard before. It was turned down low so I couldn't really make out the words. "Thanks again," I replied, buckling the seatbelt. She nodded and lipped, "You're welcome." "Oh wow, I'm so bad at meeting people." "I'm Colleen," she said. "I'm Blake," I said and ran my fingers through my drenched brown hair. "When we get to my house, just make yourself at home. My three sisters are there, so just introduce yourself." She smiled before beginning to drive. It was silent and she turned up the music a little more. I stared out the window at the rain falling hard on the ground, creating deep puddles. It was a blessing that Colleen happened to pick me up before the rain got harder. "You look very young. Why are you homeless? If you don't mind me asking," Colleen asked, and I cleared my throat, searching for words. "I ran away," I replied, short and sweet. "Well, I don't know about the sweet part." "Oh," she replied, and that was all she said. I'm assuming she doesn't want to keep bothering me and pushing to know everything. I was glad she didn't keep asking. "I don't want to think about my family and home life. I'm 24, by the way." "How old are you?" she asked. We started to drive on a sectioned-off path that enters a neighborhood full of big houses on the streets. 17. "Oh, so you're still a kid," she laughed. I don't understand what was so funny about that, but I kept silent. Something was off about her vibe. I couldn't tell what it was. I ignored it. Then we pulled into a driveway that belongs to a large white-colored house. It was big, maybe like 2 or 3 floors. It was bigger than my old home. She parked the car and shut it off. I was thankful that I wasn't stuck in that car with her any longer. The small talk we had was just awkward, and I bet I smell bad from not showering. We both stepped out of the car, and I just stood there by the passenger side awkwardly. Colleen popped the trunk and then retrieved some heavy-looking black duffel bag, dropping it to the ground and closing the trunk. "You can walk in," she said. I looked up at the sky and it was dark. The rain stopped. I have no idea what time it is. I started to walk towards the front door and I heard some voices. They all turned their heads to me. I usually don't compliment many girls, but I have to admit they were stunning. One of them had short blonde hair and a bright smile. Another had dark brown hair and freckles covering her cheeks, and one more girl entered the room, her eyes widening as she saw me and Colleen walk in. She had dark red hair and a perfect face. Colleen dropped the duffel bag to the floor and sighed heavily. "Blake, these are my sisters." She proceeded to introduce me to the beautiful girls. I learned that the short blonde-haired one was Helen, the brown-haired and freckle-faced was Nadine, and the redhead was Anne. "So is this your boyfriend?" Nadine asked and turned herself around to focus her attention on us. "But no, I just met him, and he has nowhere to go, so I decided to let him stay for a warm meal," Colleen said. But that Anne girl wasn't having it. Colleen, can I speak to you for a minute, alone? She crossed her arms. Of course, just help me with this. They both carried the heavy bag and I offered to help them, but they quickly denied. I think they could tell that I was wondering what's in the bag, so they answered my thoughts. Colleen's gym bag, heavy as shit. Anne was quick to respond. Colleen was fit, and I bet she could knock me out with one punch. Her toned arms said it all. So why don't you have anywhere to go? Helen asked, and I quietly took a seat on their white recliner across from the couch. I ran away from home. It's a long story. I don't want to get too into it. I gave a small smile. That's too bad. How old are you? She asked. I hadn't realized an hour had passed by, and I was just sitting here telling stories and talking with Helen and Nadine. They were really nice. I heard some of their stories too. Colleen and Anne finally returned to the living room, and I almost questioned their disappearance, but I didn't. It's none of my business. Anne still looked pissed off, but not as much as before. She really was pretty. She had the perfect face and didn't look like she was wearing a lot of makeup. She had dark red hair that looked curled a bit. She wore a white blouse and a black pencil skirt. I don't know women's fashion. Soup should be acceptable for dinner, right? Anne cleared her throat and asked. Everyone was looking at me, and I felt put on the spot. But I nodded. Yeah, good. I'll start making it. Anne turned on her heels and walked over through the dining room and entered what I'm assuming is the kitchen. She is the best cook in the house, Helen explained and looked over at the TV. Colleen and Nadine looked at each other for a mere 10 seconds before Colleen spoke up. Why don't you take a shower? I'll get you some clothes. She smiled and walked upstairs. Clothes? I don't think there's any other guy in this house but me. I cringed at the thought of having to wear some girly pants and shirt. Colleen returned downstairs and her lips curled to a smile. She had a pile of clothes neatly folded in her arms and a dark red towel and handed them to me. They're clean, just out of the dryer. The shower's upstairs and the first door to the left. She sat down next to Nadine and Helen. Thanks, I said. I walked upstairs and entered the bathroom. I set the pile of clothes on the edge of the sink and peeled the damp clothes off my body, leaving them in a messy pile on the white tiled floor. After about 20 minutes of trying to figure out how to turn the shower on and get it at the right temp, I was relaxing under the hot water. It felt nice. I haven't had a shower, or at least a warm one, in a while. I looked over at the body washes and shampoo, coconut-scented stuff. I was grateful that it wasn't too feminine. After I was done washing my body and was satisfied with the warm water making me feel good and washing off the rest of my worries for the night, I turned off the water and dried myself off. I looked at the clothes she gave me. I was surprised. They were actually men's clothes. I had questions, but I didn't know if I should ask them. I put on the slightly large black shirt and dark red sweatpants that seemed to be my size. I also put the white socks on and gathered my dirty clothes outside. I walked down the stairs. Here, I'll take those. Nadine smiled and took the dirty clothes out of my hand and threw them in a hamper nearby. Colleen smiled as I stood near the couches. What? I nervously laughed. Was my shirt inside out? You sure look good in those clothes. Colleen's lips curled into a smile. Anne walked into the living room and looked at me, freezing, and then looked at Colleen. Colleen, really? She asked, and I was confused. What? Doesn't he look great? Colleen said, and smiled once more. Helen and Nadine were concentrating on the TV screen, out of the conversation completely. Oh yeah, you must be wondering where your clothes are from. There? Colleen was interrupted mid-sentence. One of my ex-boyfriends, he left some of his clothes here. I hope you don't mind that you're wearing them. Anne surprised me by smiling nervously. She then gave a look to Colleen and she shrugged it off. After being completely confused, I sat down at the recliner across from the couch. Anne turned on her heels and sighed, walking back to the kitchen. Dinner's ready. Dinner was served and we were all sitting in the dining room. It was quiet except the background noise of the TV show playing in the living room. I looked down at the bowl of soup one had in front of me. The steam warmed my face. There were chopped vegetables and what looked like chicken. I started eagerly eating away, which earned me some weird looks from Nadine and Helen. They were all eating slowly and politely, and there's me. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in a very long time. The chicken kind of tasted weird and different, but I haven't had chicken in a long time either. I guess being away from your mother's home-cooked meals really does have an effect on you. I finished the bowl and thanked Anne and the rest of the girls for dinner. Anne and Colleen both exchanged weird looks, but I shrugged it off. I felt a judgment, and I'm not sure why. Thanks again, I said politely and sat up, pushing my chair in. Thanks for the meal and shower. I'll leave now. I started to head towards the door. Wait, Blake. Colleen stood up and walked towards me, placing her soft hand on my shoulder. We don't want you to leave so soon. Why don't you stay the night? You shouldn't be sitting out in the rain much longer. You'll get sick. Colleen sounded concerned. Her words were all jumbled together. It seemed like she really didn't want me to leave. Oh, if you guys don't mind. We don't. Just please stay. Colleen smiled and the rest of the girls continued to eat. I walked back towards the table and waited for the rest of the girls to finish eating. After dinner, I offered to help Anne load the dishwasher and clean up. I thought she would say no, but she actually let me help. She was really quiet, and it seemed like she didn't want to talk that much. I loaded all of the dishes, and Anne put the leftovers in a Tupperware container. She handed it to me and asked if I could find a place in the fridge to put it. I grabbed the soup and opened the fridge and placed it on the middle shelf. There was some object or meat wrapped up in tinfoil, but I didn't question it. It was oddly huge in size and took up most of the back of the top shelf. Anne noticed I'd been staring into the fridge for too long and she walked up to me. "That's the pork roast I'm making for tomorrow's dinner," she politely said, answering my internal thoughts and questions. "Thanks for helping clean up," she smiled, and then looked at the floor and frowned. Something definitely seemed wrong with her, but I was afraid to ask and have her say everything's fine. That's what most girls do anyway. They say they're fine when they're obviously not. I heard some rumbling noises, but I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. I walked out of the kitchen and sat on the couch next to the girls. Anne was cleaning around. She was wiping down the dining room table. She took out the trash, and she went back in the kitchen to mop the floor. She seemed like she needed to keep herself busy. "Need a hand?" I asked. She seemed surprised by my question, but she silently shook her head. "I just want to thank you again for having me stay here. It means a lot," I told her, and I meant it. It seemed like Anne really didn't want me to be here for some reason, but I think I know why. She doesn't want her nice home to be open to strangers and homeless people. I bet that I was making her uncomfortable just by being here. But she smiled at me. "It's only a temporary thing, okay? You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here too long," Anne told me. I was confused for a second. I wasn't sure what she meant by that. "I promise I'll be gone tomorrow morning," I told her, even though I didn't have anywhere else to stay. She looked worried and a little sad by my response. In her eyes, it looked like she truly felt bad for me. But she had to stand her ground, and if kicking me out of her home makes her comfortable, then I will leave. "I'm really sorry. I don't want you to think I'm a bitch. It's just my sisters. She stopped herself sharply before taking a minute to rephrase herself. "They don't like company. That's okay. I understand," I responded. She held pity in her eyes when she looked at me. It looked like she had more to say, but she decided to keep it to herself. A few hours had passed by, and everyone looked exhausted. I was tired too. The girls had gone in and out of the shower and already dressed for bed. Nadine and Helen yawned as in cue and got up. "I need to go to bed. I might have work tomorrow and I'm not looking forward to it." Helen laughed and waved at me. "Good night, Drake, is it?" "Blake." I laughed and she laughed too while saying, "Oh, sorry. Well, good night, see you tomorrow, I guess," and she walked somewhere upstairs. Nadine and Colleen also went upstairs, and it was just me in front of the TV. Anne got out of the shower and looked at me. "I'll show you where your room is. Sorry that they didn't show you," Anne said quietly, and I told her it was okay. The TV was shut off and so were some lights. It was completely dark. She led me all the way upstairs and all the way to the furthest room down the hall to the right. It looks like it hasn't been touched in years. She opened the door and it showed a decent room. Everything was red, kind of what the color scheme is, I'm assuming. Red bed and sheet set, red curtains, but the carpet was white. There were also white walls and a white nightstand and dresser. "Well, good night," Anne said and shut the door. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtains back. It was a far view from the ground, not too far, but still pretty far. I began to wonder what I'm going to do for the next couple of days. I know these girls won't let me stay forever. They're probably just going to drop me off at the same place I've always been at for the past couple of weeks. Staying here and taking a nice warm shower, changing into clean clothes, and eating dinner has been a luxury for me. I kept hearing a rumbling sound, but it was muffled now, and I couldn't hear it as clearly as I did earlier. Maybe it's something up with the plumbing? I didn't know what it was. I shook it off and slowly drifted off into a peaceful, comfortable sleep. I woke up and expected to be accompanied by the bright morning sunlight to be gleaming through the windows, but it wasn't. I looked at the alarm clock on the nightstand beside me. It was midnight. How have I only been sleeping for a couple hours? I just couldn't see to fall back asleep. I thought that I would be out like a light since this has been the first bed I have been sleeping in for a while. But I couldn't fall back asleep. I got up and shuffled across the dark room and flicked the light on. I left the room but was sure to be quiet and not to wake any of the girls. After using the bathroom and washing my hands, I walked back into the hall. My hand wrapped around the doorknob to the room I'm staying in, but I decided not to go in. Maybe I need a glass of water. I continued to be as quiet as possible as I trailed down the stairs and past the living room, dining room, and finally entering the kitchen. It was eerily quiet. I could hear myself breathing. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and walked over to the cooler. As I was drinking the crisp water, I heard rustling and movement. It sounded like a raccoon or some other animal got into the basement. Then, that's when it happened. I heard a thud and a "help me?" I was so frightened that the glass of water snipped out of my hands and smashed against the hard kitchen floor. I didn't know what to do. That was definitely another man's voice. It didn't sound like any regular cry for help. It was pain. You could hear the pain and agony and death even in their voice. And I was frightened. I was frozen, but I wanted to run and scream. But I couldn't. I stared at the door leading to the basement. I was terrified to open the door and investigate. Then I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, and there she was, Anne. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, and looked terrified even. "How did she get here so fast?" I don't even know. I was just getting myself a glass of water. My mind couldn't even process what I heard. I didn't want to remember it. Anne hurriedly cleaned up the mess of the broken glass and mopped up the water. If there's anything I've learned about Anne during my short stay here, it's that she despises a mess. "I think you should go back to bed now, before Colleen comes down here." Anne gave me this look, like she was praying I would just obey her order and run upstairs and hide under the covers. "But why? What? Okay," I whispered back and walked back to the room I was staying in. I definitely couldn't fall back asleep now. I pulled the covers over me and just stared up at the ceiling. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep and I woke up early in the morning. I walked downstairs to see the girls rushing around getting ready, probably leaving for work. Anne was dressed up quite professionally, and I couldn't help but admire her. Her red hair was curled into spirals that rested on her shoulders. "I wonder what she does for a living." "I'm a student teacher at the elementary schools," Anne replied, as if she just read my mind. "That's great," I said. It was weird, pretending that nothing happened last night. She kept looking at me. I guess she wondered if I was still thinking about last night's events. I definitely was, but I wasn't going to say anything. "You can hang out here today, okay? I know you didn't sleep much last night." Anne spoke softly. "Will you leave after dinner tonight?" I was beyond grateful and didn't expect this offer from Anne. I smiled and nodded my head. "Of course, thank you so much," I replied. "Yeah, of course, I will see you later," Anne said with no emotion. Soon the three girls left for their jobs. I was thankful that I wasn't home alone. Helen was still there sitting on the couch. We got into some small talk, and she explained to me that she babysits a lot but she happened to have no call-ins today. I considered getting a job. Then I could save up my money and get a place of my own one day. "I was wondering if you would like to help me around the house?" Helen asked while standing up. Her short hair was flat and she wore minimal makeup. She was wearing light wash skinny jeans and Toms and a dark purple sweatshirt. "Of course," I replied. These girls were so nice, I would take any opportunity I can to repay them. "Great, okay, so I have to gather all the laundry in the hampers to take down to the laundry room downstairs," Helen said, and then bit the side of her lip in thought. "And maybe you can help take the trash out. Nadine would be thankful if she didn't have to take it out today." She laughed and I nodded. "All right." So I went to the kitchen and took out the garbage and put a new bag in the can and pulled the garbage to the curb. Throughout the day, I've just been helping Helen clean and she played some music on the TV. "I'll make us some lunch. Thanks again for the help." Helen got up from the couch and trailed into the kitchen. I heard the fridge open and shut a couple times and plates were set on the counter. I just continued to watch the television screen with the music station channel on, playing some laid-back rock song. I watched as the music icon moved from spots on the TV screen. I couldn't stop thinking about what I heard last night. Did it even happen? Was it just a dream that seemed way too real? I didn't know what to believe. "Lunch is ready." Helen set a plate with a sandwich on the dining table. I walked over to it and opened the sandwich's slice of bread. It had some sort of roast beef in it and provolone cheese. I ate it quickly, and by the time I finished, the front door opened and Nadine walked in. She sighed and hung up her jacket. "Long day of bullshit," she laughed, and so did Helen. She walked into the kitchen, passing me at the table. I walked into the kitchen and set the plate in the sink. "What the fuck do you think you're doing? Wash that. Any dishes you use during the day must be hand-washed and night dishes get put in the dishwasher." Nadine scowled. Her sudden attitude caught me off guard. "So, I guess not all of the sisters are as nice as I thought." "Oh?" I kinda laughed and used the soap and sponge to wash the plate I used. "My bad." "Yeah, Anne's rules. She wants to make sure everything is clean and perfect," Nadine said while she reached into the fridge and pulled out a brown bag towards the back of the fridge. After washing the dish, I placed it on the drying rack. I watched as Nadine pulled out bread and opened the brown paper bag and pulled out something wrapped up in tinfoil out of it. It was the roast beef I had on my sandwich earlier. I walked out of the kitchen and saw that Anne was home too. She smiled and plopped down on the couch and chatted with Helen. Within 3 hours, Colleen got home from work and we were all seated at the dining room table eating dinner. I remember what Anne told me, and it was time to leave. I thanked everyone for letting me stay. I got up and started heading towards the door, but Colleen got up and ran in my direction, blocking the front door with her hand resting against it. "Where are you going? You can't go back out there," she said. Anne was seated at the table, and her facial expression narrowed, almost like she was telepathically asking Colleen, "What the fuck are you doing? Why not? It's not raining anymore." I countered. "Anne told me to leave after dinner. I promised her." Colleen looked over at Anne with an angry expression on her face. Anne just sat there keeping her composure. "And is that how you choose to treat him? Blake, you can stay. We like you," she smiled. Anne wanted to say something, but Colleen talked over her. "We decided that we'll let you stay here for 2 weeks. That should give you enough time to try and get a job and maybe rent a hotel room. I feel terrible just throwing you out right after you found a place to stay." Colleen surprised me by staying. She snapped her head in Anne's direction, scowling. 2 weeks? Are you for real?" My mouth formed an O shape in surprise. "Yeah, we're just nice like that." Colleen smiled and Anne shook her head. I felt bad, me staying here, and Anne clearly doesn't enjoy company. Or she just doesn't enjoy homeless guys chilling at her house. And I totally agree with her. I feel bad. "Thank you, all of you. This was so unexpected. If there's anything you want me to do for you guys, just let me know. I can clean, I can have chores, anything to repay you guys," I said. 2 weeks seems like a long time and a short time put together. I will have to try and get a job quickly, and hopefully get back on my feet. I can always go back to my house, but I try to avoid that option. I am not going back there. "Do you have a computer so I can start filling out job applications?" I asked eagerly. "I know I have 2 weeks, but I am not wasting any time. I am serious about working and getting a place of my own, even if it's really small. It's better than nothing, and I really want to get back on my feet." Colleen smiled and looked over at Helen and Nadine sitting next to me on the couch. "It's getting late, don't worry about that now. You can start working on that tomorrow." "I promise if you just remind me in the morning." "Thanks," I replied to Colleen, and after hours of just sitting here watching a show with them, we all went to bed. I was tired as hell, but I just laid there in bed, staring up at the white ceiling. I couldn't get what happened out of my mind. The voice I heard, it sounded like a guy in the basement. Why would these girls hoard a man in the basement? They're so nice and definitely not serial killers at first glance. Maybe I was just hearing things. I drifted off into a deep sleep, and I was thankful to finally sleep comfortably in what seems like forever again. "Help me," I jerked awake, covered in sweat. I immediately felt sick to my stomach, a very unsettling feeling. I was having a horrible nightmare. I glanced over at the clock on the white nightstand. 12:46 p.m. I got up and walked downstairs, expecting to hear nonsense chatter between the women or just something, but it was completely silent throughout the home. The TV was off and the window was cracked open so the sunlight poured into the living room, and the birds could be heard singing. There was a pile of clothes on the coffee table, accompanied by a note. I walked over to it and picked it up. "Blake, we all went to our good friend's house for the day. Sorry we didn't mention this last night. It was decided last minute. Here's a new change of clothes and there's a clean towel in the bathroom. You can shower and here's how to work the TV." Followed by some instructions regarding the TV. "We should be home soon." The girls, I definitely didn't expect to be left all alone in their nice home. It gave me a sense of relief, knowing they trust me. I grabbed the pile of clothes and walked upstairs to the bathroom. Where are they getting all of these men's clothes from? I stripped out of the ones I was wearing and left them on the tiled floor. I decided to take my time with the shower this time. No rush, it felt nice. When I got out, I dried myself and changed into the new clothes, which happened to be dark blue sweatpants and a tight-fitting black shirt. I felt nice and refreshed after the shower. I decided to help myself to the kitchen to get something to eat. I grabbed a pack of small blueberry muffins from the cabinet. I turned and quickly glanced at the basement door. Part of me wanted to padlock the door so whatever's in there will never come up to kill me or any of us here. Another part of me wanted to believe that I was just imagining things, and that I'm an idiot for ever thinking there's a monster or something down there. But there was one other part of me, the part of me that wanted to go down there and find out for myself. The basement. I kept thinking about it. Even though it might have just been my imagination, I just wanted to confirm that there was nothing down there. The basement. Check the basement. My curiosity got the best of me. I shuffled over to the basement door. There's nothing down there. I'm just going down there to confirm that there is nothing down there. I slowly opened the door and walked down the stairs one step at a time. But something in the back of my mind was yelling at me to turn around now. Anne's POV, "I'm so glad you girls could come here today. I just missed you all so much." Lauren pulled each of us into a small hug. "We missed you too, Lauren. It's been years," I heard Colleen say. I was usually the quiet and more reserved sister. I just listened as everyone talked. I looked down at my hands folded nicely together. I thought about Blake. I wondered what he was up to. I hoped he wasn't laying around all day trashing up the place, but somehow I knew I could trust him. I felt very bad for him, and the feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. "When's the wedding?" Nadine asked. "April. It's just a few months away, and I get more and more excited when it gets closer." Lauren smiled and they both kissed, and I felt awkward. I've never had a boyfriend. I think it's impossible to love someone like me, someone who doesn't deserve an ounce of love. I know I'm not alone in that feeling because my sisters are exactly the same as me. They're my foster sisters. We all got adopted together. That's when we met Lauren too. We all met in the same orphanage. As much as I try to forget about that whole experience, I can't help but think about it all the time. Flashback, I sat all alone in the orphanage. I truly missed my parents so much. I lost them. But I never speak of how I lost them. But things changed when I met these two sweet girls, Nadine and Helen. They were my first and only friends in this orphanage. We were all young, too young to remember. But I remember everything so perfectly. I wonder if Colleen remembers too. I mean, she should. Memories, the true horror. I wish I could just forget about it all, but I can't. You aren't going to tell anyone what you just saw. It'll be our little secret. We will be best friends forever. I have to make sure you never tell my secret. It's your secret too, and there's nothing you can do to change that. I very vividly remember Colleen telling us weeks later. I just wish I could forget the events that happened before that. End of flashback. "Hello, Anne?" Lauren waved her hand in my face and I jumped back into reality. "I'm sorry, what?" "I was zoned out," I said. And I refused to tell any of them of what I was thinking of. I said, "Dinner's ready. Let's eat." Lauren smiled and I returned one. Colleen's paw of flashback. I was always alone in this orphanage. I had no friends. I was reading a magazine when all of a sudden this really bright and bubbly redhead walked up to me. "Hey, let's be friends," she smiled. She was covered in freckles and had a cloud of red hair resting on her head. "No," I said. She seemed annoying, rude. She turned on her heels and walked away. I was already mad, but she was adding to it. She was the first person who's made contact with me in a long time. I don't know if I should take this opportunity. "Hey, what's your name?" I asked the ginger. She turned around. "Melody," she said and smiled despite my rude behavior. "I'm Colleen," I replied. "Okay, I'll be your friend. How about we play with my dolls later?" I asked and smiled. I didn't have dolls. "Yeah," she smiled and walked off. She seemed like the happiest little girl. Too bad she doesn't know what's coming to her. Hours later we met again. She asked where the dolls were, but I smiled and said, "In the basement." "I thought the grown-ups said we weren't allowed in the basement." She curled her ginger locks with her fingers. "They won't find out. I have my dolls down there, so let's go play with them." I smiled and we both walked down the creaky set of stairs further down. "Whoa, you have so many dolls. This one is so pretty." Her eyes were wide as she sat on the concrete floor in front of a pile of dolls, picking up a purple-haired one. "Yes, they're really pretty," I said. "I love them too. Too bad they weren't mine. I just stole them from another girl here." I grabbed the rusty knife from my coat pocket. I've always had this knife, but I never used it. No one ever found out that I had it. I swiped it from an old stranger on the bench. He was snoring, and that's when the pocket knife slipped out of his coat's pocket. And now it's in my hand. I jabbed the knife in the back of her neck. She gasped for air, and I stabbed her multiple times. She fell to the ground, her thick red blood spilling and already staining the concrete floor. I wasn't a serial killer. I wasn't insane. No one could understand what I do or why I do this. But I was deeply fascinated by the art I just created, the art of taking someone's life and decorating the floor with their insides. I heard some other girls' voices coming down the stairs. Oh my God, it was too late to hide any of the evidence. They would find out my secret. "Yeah, Josephine said she couldn't find her dolls anywhere." "Maybe they're down here," one voice spoke. "But why would they be down here?" another high-pitched voice replied. "I don't know. Let's just check just in case. Who would want to take?" The three girls stopped dead in their tracks. I examined each of them while my heart was literally pounding in my chest. I've never been caught before until now. The adrenaline was an intense feeling. One of the girls had shoulder-length blonde hair, almost the same exact color as mine. Another had brownish hair and freckles. The last had red hair, almost just like the ginger Melodies, but maybe a shade or two darker. They all looked frightened, and the brown-haired one screamed. I quickly ran to her and cupped her mouth with my hand. "Stop it," I demanded. The girls stood in shock. The blonde one was crying, I think. They were frozen in their tracks, and I think they didn't actually believe what was going on. "Why, you're a killer," the red-haired one cried. "No, I'm not. Stop saying that." I was mad. But Melody, the brown-haired one, whimpered in fear. "I wish I didn't have to kill, but I have to. Otherwise I can't." I didn't want to finish my sentence. "You won't get away with this." The blonde one turned on her heel and started to walk towards the stairs, but I grabbed her arm. "None of you are saying anything to anyone. And I had to make sure you don't say anything either," I said. or I'll kill the three of you right now." As I said that, the girls shrieked in fear. "You're terrible. Someone is going to find out and you'll be in trouble forever," the redhead said and wiped her tears. I learned that her name was Anne. Anne had always defied me. "No one is going to think a little innocent girl like me did anything. They'll just think you guys and Melody went missing or ran away or something. And I can clean this mess up myself. No one will know," I said. I actually wasn't sure if I could clean all of the blood, but it was enough to scare them into obeying me. They were quiet, and I was happy because I knew I had control over them. I inched closer to them. "You aren't going to tell anyone what you just saw. It'll be our little secret, and now it's your secret too. We're in this together and you can't do anything about it," I told them. I watched as they all stared with wide eyes in fear. "We promise we won't ever tell anyone about this," the redhead begged. Oh, little Anne, she was terrified of me, just as I wanted her to be. The other girls were so terrified into submission, but she wasn't until now. "I know you guys will just tell anyone as soon as you get adopted or something. I can't have you guys saying anything," I said and crossed my little arms. I was little but I was stern. "Now what are your names?" I asked and smiled. The brown-haired one wiped her tears and looked up. "Nadine," the blonde one looked scared. "Helen," and the redhead looked at me with sad eyes full of worry. "Anne, great, I'm Colleen. Now that we all know our names, we can be best friends," I smiled. "Now you guys have to help me clean up," I said and started to walk towards the stairs to get rags. "I have a question," Anne stated. "What?" I asked her. Why did you do it?" she asked. She wasn't crying anymore. She just looked sad. I knew I would sound crazy if I just said why I did this. No one understands. But these girls are going to be my new best friends and they will keep my secrets. They'll have to learn sooner or later. "You'll find out soon," I said and started to laugh. The girls looked confused, like they didn't know what that meant. I guess it was good they didn't know what it meant right away. I turned the knob and slowly started to walk down the stairs. Curiosity filled my mind as I was about to take in what I had been wondering the past few nights I have been staying here. Anticipation was running through me as I walked down the stairs one step at a time. This basement looked pretty cluttered, and I was surprised because the whole house is always spotless because of Anne. There were many boxes and shelves around the large area, but one thing in particular caught my eye. There was a metal table with a flickering light bulb hanging above it. There was also a large silver fridge across from it, like abnormally large. Maybe that's their cooler or something. I don't know. I walked slowly around the basement. So this is where the strange noise was heard. I could have sworn I heard a man's voice down here. There couldn't be. I saw a little door across from the room. I slowly walked over to it and walked in. This was the laundry room. I tilted my head in confusion when I saw a huge pile of random clothes on the floor. I picked up one of the articles of clothing, and it was a women's dress shirt that looked way too big to be any of the girls, and some men's clothing too. Whose clothes were these? Maybe this is where they're getting the clothes for me from. After I examined everything, which was mostly just me walking around and poking at things, I started walking back to the stairs. That's when I heard the front door close. My eyes got wide, and I started to panic. I heard footsteps heading towards the kitchen, and I knew someone was coming towards the basement. I saw a door that led to the outside, and I quickly ran for that and let myself out. I knew that wasn't the best idea, but I didn't want to get caught snooping around their house when they aren't here, and especially in the basement, where they don't want anyone in for some reason. I was walking on the freshly cut grass, and I was out of breath from rushing. I sat down near a bush and weighed my options. I would look like a complete idiot if I just show up at the front door again, and they'd ask where I went. And I don't want to just run back in there through where I came. That's the whole point of why I left through this door. So they don't find me in the basement. I sighed and I began walking until I reached my spot again after what felt like hours of walking. Now what? I was offered 2 weeks of living in a house while I look for a job and maybe some cheap places or even a hotel or somewhere to stay at when I get the money. And now I'm back on my own. I sat there and felt even more stupid. I mean, I guess I was used to being on the streets for a while, but now I feel even more awkward just returning to my spot on this corner. I watched as the cars drove by, some turning the corner where I'm at. But one car sparked familiarity, like I've seen it sometime before. It was my brother's car. I never wanted to see him again, and I can't believe he's this close to me. He glanced at me but acted like I was just some ordinary homeless man and continued to drive right past me. I mean, I guess it wasn't so bad and didn't hurt as much. It's hours later, it was dark, and I just continued to sit there. I kept thinking about the piles of random clothes in that basement. It placed odd questions in my mind which I refused to answer. I tried pushing them away. A car parked at the corner I was sitting at, and I was surprised. Then someone walked out and crossed their arms when they saw me. "What are you doing out here again, Blake?" Nadine asked. I didn't know what to say. I was in some weird, inexplainable situation. Why would you just run away from us and live on the streets again? You can't give up this opportunity to get back on your feet again. I could sense her frowning. Part of me wanted to ask how she knew where to find me, or why she even went looking for me. I chose not to ask. She just sighed and I stood up. You just had us worried if something happened to you, she said and gestured for me to get in the car. I sighed and we both walked in the car. She turned the music up so we didn't really talk, and it was just awkward. I can't say I was in the basement. I really wanted to ask about the things I saw though. We arrived at the house and I walked in. Helen was sitting on the couch reading a magazine, and then she looked over at me, not saying anything. Colleen walked in from the dining room and crossed her arms and sighed. Where'd you go? I thought if you wanted to go somewhere you would at least tell us, Colleen said. Just for a walk, I lied. No, I was just going back to where I was before I came here. I didn't expect these girls to be that upset with me for leaving. It started to feel a little weird now. Why do they care that much? The rest of the day went by slowly, and I was just watching TV. I asked if I could borrow their computer so I could look for jobs, but they just made excuses as to why I couldn't. Then what was the point of coming back here? I was starting to grow more and more uncomfortable being at their house. Dinner was strange. We had some meatloaf, and it must have not sat well in my stomach. Shortly after dinner, I ran up to the bathroom and threw up. I went to bed early that night, and I needed to rest my mind. I don't know whether they used veal or some other sort of meat, but it did not taste good at all, and my stomach was fighting to get rid of it. 3 days later, all of the girls went to work today, and Helen had to babysit. I walked into the living room, and I noticed everyone was gone but a letter rested on the coffee table. Blake, I got called in to babysit today, so you have the house to yourself. Please just help clean around if you want to keep yourself busy. The trash needs to be taken out. Helen, I left the note back on the cherry-colored coffee table, and I helped clean around just little things. I decided to do a little extra and to impress Anne. I wiped down the stove and countertops in the kitchen so they were spotless, a little more than they were before. I made sure there were absolutely no dishes in the sink, and I made myself some soup to eat. My stomach still ached from the weird reaction I had to the dinner last night. While it was heating in the microwave, I remembered the last thing I had to do was take out the trash. I took the bags outside into the garbage can. I looked around, and I saw a middle-aged woman with curly black hair, one of their neighbors, taking her garbage out too. She made eye contact with me and smiled and walked over to me. This was getting awkward. It's been a while since I've seen a new face around here. Did you just move in? She asked kindly. I shook my head. No, this isn't my house. I'm just staying here for a while, I replied. She made a small O with her mouth and quickly replaced it with a smile. Oh, so the girls still live here? Yeah, I replied. It's weird, I hardly see the girls, and when I do they're always bringing someone over, she said. What? Oh, I replied. I didn't want to engage in conversation. Yeah, I assumed they just enjoyed the company. What's your name? She asked me. Blake, I told her. I'm Nancy. It was nice to meet you, she said. But after we talked a little more she turned on her heel and went back inside her house. I did the same. I ate my soup on the couch and watched the TV. It felt like forever since the girls were here, although I actually do enjoy being alone. I finished my chicken noodle soup and washed the bowl and spoon one used, and placed it on the drying rack beside the sink. Colleen was supposed to let me use her computer but hasn't let me use it yet. I knew I shouldn't just be using their stuff without their permission, but I really needed to find a job. I looked in every room to find Colleen's, and I finally reached a room across from the one I'm staying at. The theme for this room is blue. Everything is blue, from the bed set to the carpet to the curtains. There was also a white dresser and nightstand. I spotted the computer at the white desk. I sat and tried to turn it on. But here's the thing, it wouldn't turn on. From the looks, why didn't she tell me her desktop was broken? Why did she say I can use it later if she knew it wouldn't work? It felt like the girls were gone forever. Maybe the day is just going by slow. I sat on the couch watching TV, which was playing some movie that I don't think I've seen before. I eventually drifted off into sleep on the couch. Help me, it must be a nightmare. Maybe it's from the other night. Someone help me. I jerked awake and was covered in sweat. As I was catching my breath, it happened again. Help me, I realized. The voices weren't coming from my dream. It's actually happening now. I was shaking and turned to look at my surroundings. The TV is still on and the sun is still up. It will probably set soon. The girls were still not back, I can tell from the complete silence, and I would have woken up if they were here. I hurried to the basement and opened the door. The voice was so much louder and clearer, I was so scared. That's when I saw it. A man was stripped down and laying on the metal table I saw before. He was tied down and a knife was laying on the concrete ground beneath the table. My eyes got wide and I almost threw up. What the fuck is this? He jerked his head to look in my direction and his eyes got wide too. Help me, he said, this time much lower. Almost like a whisper, but I could definitely hear it. I stood frozen for a couple seconds, but my legs decided to work and I rushed over to the table. I frantically tried to untie the tight knots on the rope holding him down and in place. Who did this? When did this happen? I was trying to figure it all out as I was trying to undo the rope. Use the knife, the man said. I examined him. He had sweat covering his face and tears too, I think. I did as he said and picked up the rusty knife. Who the hell was doing this? Did they plan on killing him, torturing him? I couldn't figure it out. I knew it was my gut instinct that made me leave this place the other day. I didn't know exactly what made me want to leave, but now I know. It was the universe trying to get me the fuck away from this hell. But I'm back here, and it might be too late. I tried to rip apart the knots, but they were just too tight. Suddenly, something really hard hit the back of my head, and everything went black. It's about time, I heard someone's voice, I think. I might be going crazy right now. Everything was still black, but I could hear mumbles and people moving around. How long has it been this way? I slowly opened my eyes. My vision was blurred, but it started to focus. I was not laying down. I was sat up against a wall. A concrete wall. I was in the basement, the last place I remember being before I was knocked out. My hands were tied with a rope behind my back. My head was bounding, and I tried to focus on what is happening in front of me. Oh, look who's finally awake, Colleen laughed. What's happening? I asked. I was so confused and my head really hurt a lot. I don't think I need to answer that. Everything is right in front of you, she said and gestured towards the room. The man was not screaming anymore. His eyes weren't even open. Was he alive? He was still rested on the metal table and Colleen had a knife in her hand. Where were the others? You killed him, how could you? I was so scared and I knew the same thing would happen to me, I think. Oh hush, I did no such thing, she chuckled and brought the knife to the man. You're a sick bitch, is this what I've been hearing lately? You murdering innocent people. I couldn't believe what I was saying. I just hoped it was all a dream. Oh hush, I wouldn't be running my mouth, especially the one who's tied up and can't run anywhere. She laughed once more and stabbed the man. The sound of the knife entering the man's body made me sick to my stomach. How is this all real? You know someone's gonna find you. Do you think you can just get away with this? I had so much to say, but I could barely breathe. Really? No one found me. I've been doing this for over 10 years. I don't think anyone's found me yet. Colleen began slicing like actual chunks out of the man's body. I looked away and I knew the bile was rising in my throat. Colleen noticed I was purposely looking away and left the knife next to the man's body. She came over to me and knelt down, level with my eyes. You want to know everything, it might be a little too much for you. Colleen smiled. But as if this isn't already enough for me, I said and looked into her evil fucking eyes. Why did I even agree on coming back here? She just laughed lightly and sat down cross-legged opposite of me, and I sat there weak as she stared at me. I've just always had this craving that was never satisfied. I've had it for as long as I could remember, she said and traced the outline of my jaw with her thumb. It's crazy, but maybe it isn't. No one understands fully except for me and my sisters. I arched a brow and my heart was beating fast in my chest. I was in a foster home with many other kids. Helen, Nadine, and Anne were there too. We made a little promise and we got adopted together. That's when I finally had my craving satisfied, but they don't taste as good when they're dead, she said. Then she tugged at the collar of the shirt I was wearing. The clothes you're wearing, she then threw her head back in laughter. They're the clothes of my victims. She's fucking crazy. I struggled to get the rope untied so I can get the fuck out of here and call the cops. But as if this isn't already enough for me, I said and looked into her evil fucking eyes. Why did I even agree on coming back here? She just laughed lightly and sat down cross-legged opposite of me, and I sat there weak as she stared at me. I've just always had this craving that was never satisfied. I've had it for as long as I could remember, she said and traced the outline of my jaw with her thumb. It's crazy, but maybe it isn't. No one understands fully except for me and my sisters. I arched a brow and my heart was beating fast in my chest. I was in a foster home with many other kids. Helen, Nadine, and Anne were there too. We made a little promise and we got adopted together. That's when I finally had my craving satisfied, but they don't taste as good when they're dead, she said. Then she tugged at the collar of the shirt I was wearing. The clothes you're wearing, she then threw her head back in laughter. They're the clothes of my victims. She's fucking crazy. I struggled to get the rope untied so I can get the fuck out of here and call the cops. You thought you were staying for a while, then you'll be free. It was so easy getting your hopes up. We just had to make sure you weren't gonna leave. Then she looked back up at me. I mean, it doesn't taste as bad as you think. I mean, you've had it before. My eyes widened, and I knew I was gonna throw up any second. What? I said, more like whispered. My voice was barely audible. Every dinner you've had here was made with human people. You were eating people too, you didn't seem to complain, she said. Now that everything's explained, I have to finish this poor guy. We're not gonna go starving now, are we? She smiled and got up and continued to do what she was doing. I was sick all over the ground in front of me and I couldn't even wipe the evidence off my mouth. I looked for something, anything to free me of this torture chamber. I looked behind me and saw a blade resting on the shelf. It wasn't too high up and I tried lifting myself to get it. When it fell down, I spent a while until I was free of the rope. Colleen turned around and I was already up the stairs entering the kitchen. I sprinted past the rooms until I was in the living room. Helen, Nadine and Anne frowned at me as I was covered in sweat and tears and couldn't breathe. "What's wrong, Blake?" Helen asked, and I pointed to the other room. "Colleen, she's..." I began to talk, but I had to catch my breath and the girls looked behind me. "Right behind you." I heard Colleen finish my sentence. The girls grabbed onto me, except for Anne. "Come on, Anne, fucking help me," Colleen said as she struggled to hold me down. The doorbell rang, startling all of us. "Shit," Colleen whispered. Then Helen and Nadine dragged me to the other room and kept me against a wall out of sight. Anne just stood there frowning and seemed out of place. Why isn't she trying to help her other psychotic sisters kill me? "Hey," Colleen answered the door awkwardly. "Good evening, dear. Is Blake here?" It was Nancy. I could hear the confusion in Colleen's voice. No, he's at work." "Why?" I struggled to break free of the girls and they threw their hands to cup my mouth when I squirmed and yelled, "Help," but it was muffled. "Oh, well, he seemed like a nice kid when we talked earlier and I just wanted to tell him something. It's about his family. I think I recognized him. Anyway, when he gets home will you let me know?" Nancy said. "Yeah, sure, whatever." Colleen shut the door and stomped towards us. "Let's get this over with, okay?" Colleen said, and they tied me back up, dragging me back to the basement. "No," we all jerked our heads behind us to see Anne. Her hands were in fists at her sides. "Anne," Colleen cleared her throat. "I am not letting this happen anymore. You're fucking sick and we're all tired of you doing this to us. You don't have control over us anymore," Anne yelled. Colleen dropped me and half of my body fell to the floor. The other half was being held up by Helen and Nadine. "Excuse me, you fucking heard me. You've killed so many people, Colleen, and blamed it on us, from the little girl at the foster home, and countless of innocent people in the basement of this house, and now him. You think you're all normal but you're not," Anne said, and Colleen stomped over to her and slapped her across the face. "I could have easily killed you three. But no, I picked you guys to be safe forever. As long as you're with me, you won't get hurt. Now you're doing this," Colleen yelled back. "I won't let you kill another innocent soul in this basement. You're done, Colleen, and I'm calling the cops." Anne turned around and stomped up the stairs. Colleen ran after her, pulling her back and falling into her arms at the end. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Colleen said through grit teeth. "Or what? Tell me." Anne pushed. Helen and Nadine didn't know what to do. They just looked at each other as they held me tightly in their arms. "I think you know the answer. I remember the way you looked at me in fear when I told you what would happen if you decide to do something like this," Colleen said, inching towards Anne. "You're gonna kill me," Anne laughed. Colleen wasn't laughing. She picked up the blood-stained knife next to the dead man's rotting body on the metal table. "I've given you this opportunity to just keep your mouth shut and do as I say and you would be all right." Without hesitation, Colleen pushed the rusty knife into Anne's body. Blood poured out of the wound and also trickled from the corners of her lips. She fell to the ground and I couldn't explain the anger I was feeling. I struggled to get free of the two girls holding me down, but there was no budge. "Let me go, fuck," I screamed. Anne just laid there on the cold concrete ground, surrounded in a pool of her own dark blood. And I thought she would be the best listener. Sorry things had to come to this. Colleen pulled the knife from her body and just watched as Anne was slowly dying. "Shut him up, girls. I have to finish this one." Colleen pointed to the dead man's body on the table. "And he's next. We've spent too much time doing this. We have to be quick." Colleen stepped over Anne's dying body and continued to cut the man's body into chunks. "You'll never get away with this. You're sick. How do you even think this shit is normal?" I yelled. I started to scream out as loud as I can so anyone can hear and come save me. "You guys can't even do one simple thing. Guess I have to do it myself then." Colleen dropped the knife on the man's body and walked over to a cabinet above the weird fridge and pulled out a syringe and a vial of something. I swallowed hard as to prepare myself for what would happen next. "This will calm your nerves." Colleen pushed the needle in my arm and I could feel my face turn beet red. I screamed as loud as I could while shaking, trying to get free. Then everything turned black again. I woke up and everything was cold. As soon as my blurry vision cleared, I realized where I was. My back was on the cold metal table where many of their victims breathed their last breath. I jerked to the side and I was tied down completely. I kept trying to shake my way out of this, not caring if the metal table falls to the side. I needed to get out. "Help!" I screamed repeatedly. Colleen walked up to me and slapped me across the face. "Shut up," she said and put gloves on her hands. "No, help." I wasn't gonna stop screaming. How did my life come to this? First I was abused, then I was homeless, then I was brought in a house, and now I'm on this metal table waiting to be chopped up and put in a stew. You better stop it, Blake. No one's gonna hear you. No one's coming for you. Just like all the other people we've killed, no one ever found them. So just shut up because no one's coming for you," Colleen screamed back. I squirmed as my hands and ankles were tied securely. There has to be at least some way out of here. I was just trying to have hope. Nadine walked up behind Colleen and smiled. "Don't worry, Colleen, I'll take care of him." She shoved a rag in my mouth and my screams were muffled, a harder chance of someone hearing me. I thought I heard footsteps above us, but I accepted the fact that I might have already lost my mind. I kept squirming on the table and Nadine put tape over my mouth. I was gagging and tears ran down my cheeks. So this is it. This is how I'm going to die. I never imagined how scary it would be this close to death. "Nadine, what are you doing?" Helen asked. Nadine turned around to face her. "I'm helping Colleen. What the fuck are you doing over there? You're no help." Helen crossed her arms. "This is not what we planned." "What the fuck are you guys talking about? You guys had a plan. Why don't you tell us about your plan?" Colleen was pissed off now, and wasn't the only one who didn't agree with what you did. "We were on her side all along. We're not crazy, you are. We just went along with it," Helen said. "So they just let Anne die like that?" "They agreed with her, but they let Anne get stabbed to death. I tried to look over at her body and it was still moving, a little bit. She would be bled out soon and I worried. I wanted to save her." "Oh really? So all you bitches are just gonna turn your backs on me? We made a promise." Colleen was getting angrier and angrier. She picked up the rusty knife stained with many people's blood. I squirmed and cried silently as tears flowed down. "What? No. I never planned to rebel against you, Colleen. I don't know what Helen is talking about. I guess her and Anne had something against you." Nadine defended herself. "Tie her up." Colleen threw rope at Nadine and she tackled Helen to the ground, eventually getting the rope tied around her hands and then ankles. "You're next, Helen, after Blake." "Damn, I never knew I would have this many to work with in a day. Hard work pays off." Colleen wiped the sweat off her forehead and picked the knife up again, walking towards me. I couldn't stop crying. "I bet you're gonna taste so good, pretty boy Blake," Colleen said with a devilish smile. Suddenly the basement door flew open. I jerked my head and so did everyone else towards the door. A woman figure stood there and she slowly walked down, obviously keeping her distance. "I heard everything." "I called the cops," Nancy said. "They will be here any minute." Colleen's face went white and she gripped the knife in her hand. "You told me Blake was at work. I found that hard to believe since I heard him screaming help over and over," Nancy said. "So I decided to come over and see what all the chaos was. I heard the front door get busted open and many footsteps could be heard upstairs. Nancy walked down the stairs and out of the way, and many police officers with guns piled down the stairs and in the room. Colleen stepped away from me on the table, her hands in the air, and she dropped her knife. Nadine put her hands up too. Everything was going by so fast. I was freed from the table and a blanket was put over me. They checked my body for any wounds, but they didn't find any. They asked if I was drugged and I nodded my head yes. It was impossible to think when my mind was everywhere at once. I didn't know what it was though. There was an ambulance here too, and they took Anne's bloody body out on a stretcher. Police looked through everything. They opened the cabinets and found the knives, the needles, and the vials they used on me and plenty of other people. Helen and I had blankets covering our bodies, and we sat on the front porch as police checked inside, all the commotion drawing attention from the neighbors. Nancy walked over to us and hugged me. "It's all over," she assured me. We were still being held for questioning, and at some point we would have to tell the police everything that was going on. I'm sure Helen had a lot more to say. A car pulled up beside the police cars and ambulance. I recognized that car. My oldest brother, Christian. "Dude, what the fuck happened to you?" he asked. My face narrowed in anger. Why does he all of a sudden care now? I never wanted to see him again. "Why the fuck do you care? It's not like you were looking for me," I said. "I was. You weren't easy to find." He laughed nervously. "Is he serious? I didn't want to be found, by you at least. Now why don't you go home?" I said. A police officer walked up to me. "Where do you live? Before you were abducted?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. "I don't even have a home." "He lives with me," Christian answered for me. "What the fuck? Are you a legal parent or guardian?" she asked. He nodded his head. "Guardian, yeah, I'm his older brother. We have a lot of questions to ask you guys," the police officer told me and Helen, and we both nodded slowly. "You guys are coming with us to the police station so we can ask everything you guys know." She helped each of us up and led us to a truck. "I'll swing by later to pick you up, okay, Blake?" he asked. It angers me how he is acting like we just got in a small argument. But that's not what happened. He abused me, mentally and physically, maybe just more mentally. All he would do is talk me down, and when he was angry, he would kick or punch me. And now he's acting like he's the best brother in the world. Nadine and Colleen had handcuffs behind their backs and they were about to get taken to prison for the rest of their lives. I could hear the conversation going on between Colleen and an officer. He was asking her questions, and she had to answer honestly. There's no way she would be able to lie now that everything's out on the table. You're responsible for dozens of deaths of innocent people over the past decade. Is that true? The man asked her, and she only nodded. It was recorded that a little girl around your age died in the same foster care as you. No one knows how, though. It's not confirmed who did it. Was it you? He asked. Yes, we were in the truck now, on our way to the station. I just stared out the window. It was all over. I was so close to death, but Nancy came and saved us. Helen was on the other side of the back seat. She was all part of this plan. She killed people too, or at least I think she did. She explained to the officer earlier that she only had to help Colleen and she was forced to eat the victims of Colleen. It was sickening. I wanted to throw up. All I could think about it, and she was about to save me and rebel against her foster sister, but Colleen killed her. Since the first day I was here, I knew something was off about her. I guess she was planning to rebel for a while now. I wanted to cry. I barely knew Anne, but she died standing up for me. She stood up to her sister, and she died fighting. I respected the hell out of her. May she rest in peace. You were homeless, the female officer asked me as another officer was jotting stuff down on a notepad. Yes, and you said that Colleen took you in her car and to her house, as in kidnap, she asked. No, it wasn't kidnap. She offered to take me to her house for dinner and she ended up letting me stay for a couple of days. I answered honestly, and she nodded. When you were there, what strange things have you witnessed? Was this all unexpected, or did you know something was going on? She asked, and the guy was writing stuff down. I remember getting water in the middle of the night and hearing someone scream help in the basement. I was about to go down there, but Anne was there and told me to go back to bed before Colleen finds out, I said and sighed. Why didn't I find all of this shit strange from the beginning, Anne? She asked. Yeah, it was one of her sisters living there. She was the one who was dead on the ground. Colleen stabbed her. What happened before Anne died? She asked and rested her elbows on the table. Anne said she was tired of having to do this. She was tired of having to help cover up for Colleen's murders for years. She was going to call the cops, but she got stabbed. I said all I remember. Colleen got adopted with Anne, Helen, and Nadine at the same foster care just after she killed another girl there. Do you think they were held against their will to cover up for Colleen? She asked. Yeah, but that's not the worst part of it all. I looked down and back up. What's the worst part? The officer gulped. She wouldn't just kill them. She cut them up. She stored their parts in a fridge and freezer and ate them. She made her sisters eat them too, kind of like brainwashing them into thinking it's normal. She made me eat it too without me knowing, I said. And I knew if I keep picturing it in my mind, I would throw up. The woman looked horrified. Ate them, she said in a really low voice, and I nodded. I don't know why I didn't pick up the clues. She made this meatloaf made of human, and I was just sick to my stomach after eating it without knowing what it was. She told me everything, literally everything, before she was about to kill me. It has to be the most horrifying thing I've ever been told in my life. I watched as the officer beside her was writing really fast, and the woman officer who asked the questions watched what the man wrote down. I looked at her record. She was placed in foster care because she had no parents. Her parents were brutally killed, and we have reason to believe, after all this, that she did the same thing to them, the officer told me. My head was hurting and I didn't want to talk more about it. This was going to be part of my life forever, and I'm never going to forget about it. We all stood up to leave, and I saw Christian standing at the front desk, ready to pick me up. What do you want? I harshly asked my brother. I just couldn't forgive him after all he's done to me. I said I would pick you up. You need to come home. I'll tell you everything when we get in the car. Christian looked annoyed simply because I refused to go home, but I eventually gave in. When we got in the car, he looked over at me briefly as I put my seatbelt on and we drove off. Drew moved out. He's with his girlfriend, I guess. He started off. Drew did more of the physical abusing, which is why I would go to school with bruises. I was too weak to beat the shit out of him too. When I asked, the other day, he rarely goes out, but when he does, it's either because he's going to his girlfriend's or the bar, he told me. And that's when I remembered. I saw him drive past me when I escaped the girl's house. I didn't want to think about that anymore. Oh, I saw him the other day, I casually said. Look, little brother, I'm sorry for everything. It's just been hard trying to cope without mom or dad. I didn't really mean any of the shit I said or did. And when you ran away, I figured you'd just walk around the block and come back. He scratched the back of his head. but you were really gone. It's been hard, and Drew's a real ass. Then I was called by the woman Nancy saying that there was some chaos next to her house and thought you were involved. Police and everything," he said. "He knows Nancy?" "You know Nancy, I just met her the other day," I told him. "Yeah, she's always known us. She was Mom's best friend. She's kind of like an aunt to us. She never actually sat down and met any of us, but she was at the funeral," Christian explained to me. "Wow, it really is a small world. I just want to start things over. I should have been more serious when you were gone. I guess this whole murder thing was a real wake-up call. I want to be a better brother, Blake," Christian explained. "It was getting late and I definitely needed to sleep. When we got home, I fell asleep on the couch. Things were finally getting to be the way they were before Mom and Dad died. It was peaceful sleeping, no more questions, no more fighting, and especially no more psychotic cannibal killers." Thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this telling story video, please do not forget to give us a like, comment, share, and subscribe.